Houston sweltered under a relentless late spring sun. The asphalt radiated heat, making the city shimmer with wavering mirages that blurred the edges of buildings and streetlights. Somewhere beneath this sprawling metropolis, the bayous wound through neighborhoods like dark arteries, slow and deceptively calm. Bray's Bayou was one of them, a ribbon of water lined with overgrown vegetation, litter, and the occasional abandoned dock. On a humid morning in May 2025, the bayou's murky surface betrayed a presence that had gone unnoticed for too long: the first body. A local fisherman, Marcus Bell, had been casting nets as he did every morning, humming quietly to himself, when the water's unnatural stillness caught his eye. Floating face down, legs tangled in weeds, the corpse's pale skin contrasted sharply with the brown-green water. Bell recoiled, his hand shaking as he raised the call to the authorities. Detective Andre Holloway arrived within the hour. He was 42, African-American, lean but muscular from years of patrol and fieldwork, with short-cropped black hair streaked with gray and a square jaw lined with faint scars. A navy blazer hung over a crisp button-down shirt, slacks pressed, shoes polished. Holloway always dressed with understated professionalism. Kneeling at the edge of the water, he scanned the scene, noting the position of the body, the way the weeds curled around limbs, and the subtle indentations in the mud suggesting deliberate placement. He felt the unease settle in his chest. This was no accident. The news traveled fast. Social media feeds filled with speculation and fear. Official statements downplayed connections. No evidence links these incidents, Houston police said. Yet in neighborhoods long overlooked, families whispered about missing loved ones, their fears swelling under the oppressive weight of the city's denial. Holloway watched as the sun dipped toward the horizon, orange light shimmering across the water. He couldn't shake the image of the body floating among weeds, an image that would haunt him for the weeks to come. 2 weeks later, the bayous yielded a second body, and then a third. Each was discovered by someone going about ordinary life: a jogger, a dog walker, teenagers skipping school. None were connected on paper, though the ages, late teens to early 40s, and neighborhood origins suggested a grim commonality. Holloway began mapping the discoveries on a wall of his office, a sprawling canvas of Houston's streets, neighborhoods, and waterways. Red pins marked the sites of the bodies, blue pins indicated missing person reports. Lines were drawn connecting them, forming a chaotic web that nonetheless hinted at deliberate intent. Holloway moved quietly through the city's margins, visiting families whose loved ones had vanished. He asked questions that law enforcement protocols often discouraged. Why had the disappearances gone unreported? Why had neighbors not spoken up? Through these conversations, he uncovered layers of fear, neglect, and mistrust, stories of domestic abuse, gang pressure, and bureaucratic indifference. At the same time, Cassandra Vega entered the picture. She was 29, Latina, with long dark brown hair usually worn in a loose braid, olive skin, and piercing green eyes that missed nothing. She wore a fitted blazer over jeans and ankle boots, moving with the cautious urgency of a reporter accustomed to following leads no one else would. She visited Bray's Bayou, notebook in hand, listening to the murmurs of residents whose lives had been silently overshadowed by tragedy. She documented patterns, repeated names, ages, locations, fragments of a puzzle that defied easy assembly. Holloway and Vega's paths converged almost inevitably. He offered her details he couldn't release officially. She offered insight into the overlooked lives of the victims. Together, they documented subtle clues: the angle of footprints in soft mud, personal items deliberately left behind, the careful wrapping of bodies in tarps or debris. A methodical mind was at work here, intimately familiar with Houston's bayous. By the end of May, the city's attention was reluctantly focused on the bayous. Families demanded answers, community leaders organized forums, and journalists pursued leads. Holloway and Vega worked in tandem, often venturing into abandoned warehouses, overgrown canals, and informal docks to reconstruct the killer's route. Each site revealed new details: a discarded scarf, a shoe with frayed laces, a subtle indentation in the mud that suggested the body had been dragged. The victims' demographics began to suggest a pattern. Most were from neighborhoods neglected by the city, their disappearances previously invisible to law enforcement. Holloway and Vega theorized that the killer used Houston itself as camouflage, exploiting its sprawling geography and the inattentiveness of officials. Residents whispered about sightings: a figure moving through reeds, carrying something indistinct. Fear was palpable. Holloway's experience guided their cautious approach. Vega documented every finding, her green eyes sharp, notebook full of observations that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. June brought with it escalating tension. Holloway and Vega began compiling every detail into a single timeline, connecting disappearances, locations, and possible sightings. Families shared partial memories, fragments of the victims' last movements, the people they had seen before vanishing. Holloway had to navigate the city carefully. He traced the killer's likely paths along industrial zones and neglected waterways, always aware of the city's blind spots. Vega accompanied him whenever possible, her recorder capturing statements, observations, and environmental detail that might later serve as evidence. The killer's method was becoming clearer, deliberate, precise, and adapted to Houston's sprawling geography. Holloway theorized the perpetrator had lived in the city for years, intimately familiar with both neglected neighborhoods and abandoned industrial corridors. By mid-June, the killer escalated. A body was left in broad daylight near a popular pedestrian path, making it impossible for authorities to ignore. The media exploded with speculation. Families demanded action. Holloway and Vega intensified their investigation, using interviews, neighborhood surveillance, and environmental reconstruction to deduce patterns. One night, Vega discovered security footage of a hooded figure moving along a bayou's edge, carrying a large bundle. Holloway recognized the path, it matched previous victim locations. They now had a tangible lead. The city's systemic neglect became painfully clear. Many victims had histories of domestic abuse, minor criminal charges, or social isolation. Law enforcement's prior inattention had allowed the killer's strategy to thrive. By late June, Houston was tense. The city felt smaller, as if the bayous themselves had begun to close in on its inhabitants. Holloway and Vega worked long hours, tracing leads that often ended in dead ends. The killer's knowledge of the city was evident. Each new body appeared in locations carefully chosen to delay discovery, using overgrown banks, narrow tributaries, and industrial detritus as concealment. Holloway spent mornings driving through neighborhoods most Houstonians ignored, crumbling brick warehouses, rusted chain-link fences, and narrow alleys where dumpsters overflowed with debris. Each route revealed clues to the killer's meticulous planning. He noticed subtle patterns, mud that had been disturbed by dragging a heavy object, small clusters of discarded personal items, and signs that victims had been moved after death. Vega meticulously documented every location, recording ambient sounds and the textures of each environment: water trickling over stones, the rustle of reeds, the smell of stagnant water mixed with exhaust from nearby streets. She interviewed local residents who rarely spoke to authorities, collecting fragments of stories about people seen lurking near the bayous late at night. Many refused to give names, fear binding them to silence. Holloway theorized that the killer may have been attempting not only concealment but control. Every action seemed calculated to exploit Houston's blind spots: a dead body found near a busy street one day, another left where the overgrowth hid it completely, ensuring the city was never sure when the next would appear. Holloway and Vega's investigation took them deeper into Houston's neglected corners. One evening, they found a narrow canal off a forgotten industrial street, water black with oil sheen, thick reeds lining the banks. Holloway paused, noting the signs of recent activity: footprints in the mud, trampled vegetation, a discarded shoe. Vega snapped photographs, whispering that the location could be a staging ground, where victims were held before being moved into the bayous. As the days passed, both began feeling the psychological weight of the investigation. Holloway's instincts screamed that the killer was watching, adapting, always staying one step ahead. Vega grew increasingly uneasy, sensing the invisible gaze of someone familiar with every corner of the city. Their only constant was each other, relying on meticulous observation and mutual trust to navigate a labyrinth of fear. By early July, the killer escalated in audacity. A body was discovered in the middle of a pedestrian walkway near a popular park, where joggers and dog walkers had to step around the orange police tape. The city's media erupted with coverage, and families demanded justice. The killer was no longer content with concealment, they wanted to instill fear. Holloway and Vega scrutinized the scene carefully. The positioning of the body, the angle of placement, and the absence of fingerprints suggested a professional precision. Vega noted in her notebook the killer's familiarity with daylight timing, the predictable gaps in patrol schedules, and the psychological message being sent to the city. Neighborhood interviews uncovered recurring sightings, a figure in dark clothing, carrying heavy bundles, slipping along bayou edges at dusk or dawn. Residents described an almost supernatural knowledge of paths and hidden corners. Holloway realized the killer must have lived in Houston for decades, understanding every back alley, every abandoned warehouse, every neglected bayou tributary. The breakthrough came with security footage from a convenience store near one of the discovery sites. A hooded figure carried a large, indistinct bundle, moving silently along the canal's edge. Holloway recognized the path immediately. It matched locations where previous bodies had been discovered. They finally had a lead to follow, a tangible clue connecting multiple murders. Using a combination of eyewitness accounts, neighborhood surveillance, and environmental reconstruction, Holloway and Vega identified a cluster of likely safe houses and staging areas. The killer had mapped the city with intimate knowledge, exploiting the blind spots created by decades of neglect and bureaucratic oversight. Every step revealed both meticulous planning and a disturbing audacity, a person capable of inflicting terror while remaining nearly invisible. By mid-July, law enforcement finally had enough evidence to make an arrest. Surveillance, environmental analysis, and community testimony pointed toward a single individual, someone who had lived in Houston for decades and exploited the city's waterways and industrial fringes. Families began to process relief and grief simultaneously. Justice had been served, but the trauma of what had occurred lingered. Holloway returned to Bray's Bayou one evening. The water glinted under the fading sun, deceptively calm once more. Vega stood beside him silently, notebook closed, observing the bayou's reflective surface. They had uncovered the truth, mapped the killer's path, and ensured that authorities would never dismiss these communities again. Yet even with closure, Houston itself retained its secrets, the hidden corners, the neglected neighborhoods, the veins of water where darkness had once prevailed.